things would you say are important to you when you think about your core values as a leader and how it shapes how you lead people?
My top three core values, I would say the first is definitely passion. I am passionate about the work that I do. I am passionate about just helping people transform their lives. My other leadership value is definitely honesty and integrity. And I combine the two because I don't think you can be integral without honesty. And my third value, I would honestly say, really about accountability. Being accountable to yourself first, because I always start with self. Being accountable to the individuals that you are leading and being accountable to the community that you're serving, if whatever population it is.
One of the things that Southern African American culture has that for me has been very sustaining is emphasis on relationships and on people. And for me, leadership is all about how do you make people's lives better. I don't know where that idea came into my consciousness, but I can tell you by the time I graduated from high school, I knew that that's what I wanted to do with my life. You know, it's something that I take with me regardless of whatever the setting is that I'm working in.
I would say three primary things, Khalid. I think compassion is at the heart of everything that I do. I would add courage and generosity, that ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and to have empathy. All that is compassion for me. There is an abundance mindset that I have. You are always willing to help someone out, to lift someone up. And I'm always growing and learning, and I'm sharing what has been learned. So generosity from a number of different perspectives. And then courage, just the willingness to step outside of your comfort zone, to do things that make you uncomfortable, to speak up when it's necessary to speak up, and to have the courage to be quiet when it's a moment when you need to be listening instead of talking. Passion, courage, and generosity, I think they drive everything that I do.
What's important to me, number one, is to lead with humility. Humility basically keeps me grounded and with a keen awareness as to how I got here, what was given to me in order to share with others. It's not about titles. It is not about position. Another value that I have is professional courage. Sometimes when you're leading, you're going to have to do it alone or be the first to step out. I believe in the higher power and the creator having us here for a particular reason and purpose. Another value that I have is vulnerability. It allows people to be human, secure enough to say, hey, I don't know that. Let me get back to you. When I make a mistake, because I make many, I want to own those mistakes quickly, accept accountability for those, and share with others so that they can learn and I can learn as well.
What drives me most is the desire to serve. Of course, leaning towards the eradication of all forms of discrimination. And that notion of eradicating all forms of discrimination is consistent with the language within the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the regulation that was promulgated pursuant to it. So this notion of serving from a leadership perspective allows me to listen. Listening to learn is another part of my leadership style, so to speak. What's of value? One, to serve. Serving for what purpose? For equitable access to opportunities for everyone.
What do you find most rewarding in leading others?
I think the most rewarding thing about leading others is watching other people grow and develop. It brings me joy when I see someone who directly worked for me or directly supported me in some way rise or grow in their career. I can only do so much as an individual leader, but to produce other leaders, it's like multiplying yourself. And that for me, I think is just powerful. It's more powerful than people give themselves credit for. And it can also work the opposite way. If you're not a good leader and you're not, investing in people and developing people, these are all missed opportunities. Countless lives you could have saved, countless impacts that you could have had on the world that you missed.
Some of the things that I find rewarding, Khalid, is really being able to get work done through transformative relationships. Those relationships that I develop with colleagues and peers and subordinates and others. I value connecting with people, and I value the relationships that we develop for a common purpose and a common mission. I love teaching and I love learning. Learning is a lifelong process. I learn, but I also give and I teach.
There are two things that are most rewarding for me. I don't like conflict, but I'm comfortable within conflict. What makes it very rewarding is to know that there are people that are equally committed to resolving the issue, the journey towards resolving it, but then developing folks along the way, as well as I'm developing myself. So if you have a leader that's not willing to learn, you may have an excellent manager, but you may not have a leader. So my willingness to learn, but my willingness to also share the knowledge that I've learned.
So I really do believe is that great leaders are inspired when they're able to assist and help people to go beyond where they are. That you've made a difference that's going to last. It's something that has been transformational in nature, that you see someone has actually been able to change.
We look at structures a lot of times and we kind of throw up our hands and say, this is never going to change. If you come at the issue in the right way, if you are consistent, if you can build consensus, if you can do all the things that we know from change management science and apply that you can actually make differences. And I've seen that. I've seen that in different states, different settings, different areas. That just gives me a lot of hope and belief that our efforts don't go in vain, and that a lot of things that we think are intractable problems really are not intractable. What's intractable is our mindset that says that this is a problem that I can't fix. When we open up and are willing to change our mental models about things, we actually can get a lot more done.
What are some challenges? I don't know if you can identify at least one challenge you find in leading others, overcome that to keep going and do the things that you do as a leader.
What you're working on. Sometimes the goal and the ultimate end, sometimes in your tenure or sometimes even in your lifetime, you'll never see the outcome. My intent is to leave a place or a space or an organization better than what I found it. But when I pass that baton, it's better than what I found it. But not being able to see, okay, what happens?
Right.
Sometimes is bittersweet, because you want to stick and stay. But leadership is really about the influence and that you leave, not just for you and the people around you, but the people that comes behind you.
I have many, many examples, but I'll use one particular to the National Institutes of Health. So I was initially hired there to establish its first ever reasonable accommodation program, and that's to provide equitable access to individuals with disabilities. So when I arrived there, they had one way of doing it, and there were people who were entrenched in that way of doing it, although it raised legal risks for the organization, as well as it was not effectively serving the people it intended to serve. And as I started listening to them, I started to understand more about why they were so vested in it. And then I left them with, where you have authority to assume that risk, then you'll have to, of course, address the consequences that come with that. They said, no, we don't want to assume that risk, but we want to figure out how can we keep A and B while we change to C. But they really appreciated the fact that we must accomplish C. But at the end of the day, they heard me, they became champions for what we were doing, and they became part of the resolution. That resulted in a great, robust program being established because my willingness to engage, but their willingness to listen. Once you've gotten that, now you're on this other path.
Every time you get elevated to a different space, a new space, every time you stretch past your comfort zone, you're uncomfortable. You're uncomfortable because you have not been in that space before. You've not mastered that skill set. And every new space has a new culture, it has new requirements. What it does is it fuels those insecurities that you have. You can kind of get that sense that you're an imposter. Like, what am I doing here? Every time that you're bumped up and elevated, there's an opportunity to either be authentic and figure out, where your strengths lie and lean into those, or to kind of adopt that false bravado that I talked about. That's why you got to know who you are and you got to understand your why. If you don't embrace you, and if you don't love you, and if you don't believe, you're going to be pushed into that position where you start to shrink back. And we all know that that's not what we want.
Not being able to always get people to see in themselves what you see in them. And this is sometimes where leaders and the folks that they're leading, they struggle a little bit. Leading in the context of there are things that I think I experience uniquely as a woman of color that may or may not be applicable to other leaders. So this whole idea of imposter syndrome, right? Always having to constantly self-talk and remind yourself, you belong in this room. There are not a lot of individuals, there's not a lot of representation of women in leadership specifically young women in leadership of color, fighting through that, and still being able to be an example to people, still being able to show up strong all of the time is something that I think, is difficult in leadership sometimes.
What I have found in my career is that, what's the mental model? How do they think about this issue? How do they think about whatever it is? And if the way they're thinking about it is at odds with what we're trying to do, I need to work on that first before I start to try to do change with that person. So the first thing I've done is I've acknowledged people, and I've addressed what may be going on in their head. And then the second thing that I'm going to say is, we have great evidence. And one of the things I've learned is that people in any system, in any group, people respond to different things. So some people are going to respond to data and science, and some people are going to respond to emotion, and some people are going to respond to authority speaking. I'm trained as a scientist, but I value people who can speak to the heart, because that's what's going to move some people. And so if I'm trying to get people to work differently with people in a more collaborative, in a more supportive way, as opposed to a hierarchical way, I'm going to bring to bear some people who've benefited from that. And it's like the man that I talked about with the keys who, said, this is the first time in my life I had keys, because the way you guys treated me and you treated me with respect, and you cared about what I wanted to do. That's why I got better. It is hard to argue against that.